Good evening, everyone. I'm Afia Hagan, and I'm delighted to host the second University and College Union Reclaim HE event, and we are just 2 weeks away from the UK general election. Now, I want to start off by introducing a familiar and a well-known face. It is, of course, Joe Grady, University and College Union General Secretary. Joe, it's now your turn.
Sorry. Good evening. Hello. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Joe. So tonight we're hoping to bring you an informative and, as always, an inspiring session where we are going to hear from guests including John McDonnell, the Labour MP for Hayes and Harlington, former Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer and previous trade union official, and from award-winning industrial correspondent for over 4 decades, Alan Jones, as we reflect upon the UCU demands for the next government and what UCU members can do to sound the alarm about the need for radical reform. Now, we're also going to be looking and going to be putting some of your comments, your ideas and your suggestions directly to Joe as this session unfolds. So to start us off and kick off that process, please let us know where you're watching from and how long you've been a member of UCU. Now, whilst you do that, we're going to watch a short video where we're going to hear the major concerns of people working in higher education.
Education is under attack.
I am really struggling.
I literally can't afford to make ends meet.
I've graduated with about £80,000 of debt.
PGR don't have enough money to eat.
40% staff cuts in 7 departments.
They're doing this in order to have a huge surplus.
They're just wasting money on vanity projects.
Redundancy.
Unsustainable workload.
Working conditions.
Casualisation.
The lack of representations of people that look like me.
It's at a breaking point, quite simply.
It's time to reclaim higher education for the staff and also for the students, baby. Let's do this thing.
Really, really impactful to hear what people are thinking and what they're going through. But now I'm going to hand over to Joe for some opening words. Joe, over to you.
Thank you so much. And hello again, everyone. Thank you for coming along to what is the second of our Reclaim HE live events. We are going to be talking about the sector, what we need to see change. But of course, given the announcement a few weeks ago about the general election, we are also going to be talking about that, and particularly how important it is that the next government take action to address the many, many problems that we have in the sector. And importantly, how every single member in UCU can be empowered to take action, to influence their local parliamentary candidates, to influence decision makers, and to make sure that you are casting your vote for the candidate that is going to ensure that we have the things that we need in terms of this campaign, but also for our union. Many of you, especially if you came along to the previous event, or if you attended our annual Congress in Bournemouth, will have seen the demands that we have for the next government. They were published a week or so ago. You may have also read the UCU manifesto that not only looks at higher education, but further education, continuing education and prison education, and the real root and branch repair that our sector needs. We've had decades of cuts. We've had dozens and dozens and dozens of vice chancellors and principals overseeing a sector through mismanagement. We've had a lack of investment. We've had student debt spiraling. We've had other forms of revenue and value extraction inserted into the sector through marketisation as well. And more recently, we've seen a wholesale attack on arts and humanities and other subjects that our university leaders and this current government have deemed not important enough to fund properly as well. This means that we've seen threatened course closures and threatened job losses through those departments and widespread use of insecure contracts. So just to sum up, UCU on behalf of all of our members is calling for the following things. Firstly, to improve pay and conditions across post-school education. We also need to see the implementation of stronger measures to tackle inequality. We also want to see the shift and the burden of paying for university away from students. It is completely unacceptable, and I would say a moral stain, that in this country we have students graduating with £50,000 worth of debt. We need to close the pay gap that we also have. This is particularly acute amongst our college members in UCU, who are paid significantly less than their counterparts in schools. And a key thing that we need to see is not just the rolling back of trade union legislation, which an incoming Labour government have pledged to do in the first 100 days, but also abolishing Ofsted. And I'm sure I speak for everyone in higher education that we would also like to see the Office for Students abolished too.
Thank you so much for that, Jo. Thank you. Of course, UCU members will know all about the widespread concerns regarding the higher education sector, ranging from a decade of cuts and lack of investment, with students and educators being negatively affected by course and department closures, increasing job losses and redundancies, and the widespread use of insecure work contracts. There's also concerns about an irreversible decline as UK universities slide down global league tables amid fears that the UK competitive edge will be lost. Meanwhile, numerous universities have mounting debts and face closures in the years to come as student recruitment figures fall. A litany of problems there. In your view, Joy, what action can UCU members take to push for progress and, of course, improvements?
This is a really good question, and I think it's probably helpful to take a bit of a broader look at what our union has been doing for the past few years. So UCU members on this call, students on this call, potentially members of the public and parents watching this call will know that our union has been involved in extensive industrial action over the past few years. That's particularly been the case in higher education, but it's also been the case in post-16 education and colleges as well. So we have been, like many other unions, particularly in the last 2 years, incredibly invested in taking industrial action where necessary to ensure that our members are paid properly, particularly during this cost of living crisis. I think because of the sheer determination of the Tory government that is, currently hopefully on its way out, to really continue attacking higher education, we have been in constant battle mode to stop, further casualisation, further marketisation, further driving down of standards. We've been in battle mode to save our pensions. We have been fighting on possibly every possible front. And I think what is hopeful about this current moment, what is a little bit different about this current moment, and what we all hope will be our future post July the 4th, is that the government that have been making life so difficult for education workers in general will no longer be in power. And that offers us as workers, as members of a trade union, as people who are invested in seeing those who are in education in universities thrive, the opportunity to start engaging with government on a completely different basis. We are hopefully going to take the Tories out of power. In my opinion, for education, we should hopefully be electing a Labour Party. That might not be shared by everybody on this call, but for me, that is really, really important. We have had quite a positive engagement with the shadow cabinet about things that we would like to see happen, about the changes that have to happen if we are to resuscitate higher education, and about the things that we as a union, whoever gets elected, let's be honest, July the 4th, will continue to campaign and push for. And I mentioned them a few minutes ago. So for members watching this call, for other people, what you do between now and July the 4th is crucial. Who you speak to, how you vote in your constituency, how you lobby your parliamentary candidates, how you ensure it's too late to register to vote if you haven't done that, but how you use your vote if you have one. These are really clear. We have had decades of decline now in higher education. It is time for a renewal. It is time for us to be hopefully campaigning to a government who wants to hear it, who has made it clear to us as a union that they are looking for positive ideas to work with us to implement. So speaking to people, talking about the problems, being clear about your experience and what needs to change is key. Now, I know it's difficult. Higher education in the hierarchy of concerns that people want to talk about during a general election is possibly not the top. But let me tell you, it has some of the worst working conditions you will ever encounter. And it doesn't get much better for students in the way they're treated, whether that's UK students or particularly the international students that come over here and are charged eye-watering sums. So it's on that basis I actually want to welcome our first guest. He's already had an introduction from Afia, but Alan, thank you for joining us this evening. Both myself and Afia have some questions for you. So hello.
Hello.
It's really great to speak to you, Alan. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, I'd like to start off by asking you about the media coverage of the manifestos from the main parties so far and some of the comments that the parties have made to the press. In your view, where do you see the similarities with UCU demands for the next government, and which parties really seem to have a grasp on the crisis that's facing higher education at the moment?
That's an incredibly wide-ranging question. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't say any of the manifestos go particularly into the problems you've just been talking about, and many, many more. You know, I've been covering annual conferences this last month. I'm at Unison's today. This is the 5th one I've covered in the last month. And some of the stories are just, you know, heartbreaking, what's happened to public services. So, you know, Labour are going to have, assuming it's Labour, they're going to have an incredibly difficult job when they come in. And, you know, unions generally, I think, are going to have an incredibly difficult job to make sure Labour are aware, at least aware, of the problems which are clear to everybody, I think, now. So I don't think, I mean, obviously, you know, Labour's manifesto generally is offering working people much, much more than the Conservatives. You know, I mean, incredibly, the Conservatives were talking about carrying on with their minimum service legislation if they win the election. You know, all the anger that came from that, and the fact that it wasn't used. You know, Labour will scrap that. They will scrap a lot more things. They will scrap 0 hours. So there's a lot more in Labour's manifesto than any of the other manifestos for workers. You know, nothing amazingly specific, I don't think, for higher education. But as I said, you know, it'll be your job, as it will be the job of Unison and the GMB and the RCN and the CWU and all the other unions to try and make sure Labour are aware of what they can do in those first 100 days. You know, it's going to be an incredibly interesting, dramatic first 100 days, I think. But it's not completely clear for me anyway what they will do for higher education.
You're not the only one it's not clear for. I think you're right, though, in that I think the strongest aspects of the Labour manifesto in particular is their New Deal for Workers, which for those who won't be familiar, it involves introducing employment rights that some workers have been denied from the first day of employment. And it involves the rolling back of various forms of anti-trade union legislation, one of which is the threshold for ballots. I should say that the Green Party have explicitly said that they would scrap fees, and I think that's probably worth us just flagging. But I think you're right, Alan, that one of the issues really is how we, I think, create greater awareness. You know, you obviously are one of the few journalists that cover these issues in detail. You know, that you're a kind of an expert on it. And I guess a good question for our members to maybe hear the answer from you is, what do you think are the best ways for union branches? You know, so we've got a dispute at Goldsmiths at the moment. We've got some other disputes in the UK where our members are battling course closure. How do you think we as a national union and those branches in particular can help create greater awareness around how serious these issues are?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's slightly easier at a local level to get publicity because, you know, we all know what the state of the national newspapers are now. You know, even today, when we're probably 2 weeks away from a Labour government. You know, most of the newspapers today are having a right go at Labour, criticising them. You know, goodness knows if that will continue. At local level, there's not the same kind of politics, if you like, in newspaper ownerships at local level. So I think there is nothing wrong, and I've spoken to lots of people about this, there is nothing wrong with any of your members trying to get some coverage in the local media, be it writing a story, sending a press release in, ringing the local radio station when they have phone-ins, you know, phone in, even try and get on local telly, if you like, if there's a picket line at Goldsmiths, for example. That's one way. Another way, and I'll give you an example of, I've been at the Unison conference this week. Fergal Sharkey, the ex Undertones frontman, is now involved in a fantastic campaign to clean up the rivers, basically, and critical of, you know, fat cat water companies. Since he took over the running of that campaign, there's been loads of publicity now where there wasn't before, and Labour are being pushed a bit further, I think, than they probably would have done because of his name. So, you know, for example, at Goldsmiths, one of my daughters went there, so I know there are people who are now in the arts and in the music industry who could possibly help out, give some kind of support, and go on a picket line, if you like, and have their picture taken. You know, so that you have to almost think a little bit beyond just the normal way. But locally, I think there's a better chance of getting coverage locally. Some people don't think there is, but from my experience, there definitely is. Any one of your members who fancies it, you know, write a press release, ring up the local paper, ring up the radio station, tell them what the issues are. And I think that sometimes also can lead to a bit more national coverage as well. You know, it's incredibly difficult for unions to get decent coverage in national newspapers now. You know, back in the day, they didn't have to bother at all, and there was hardly any press officers at unions. Now, every union has got communications departments. They're as good as it gets. Yours is as good as it gets. The general secretaries are as good as it gets. You know, Joe's brilliant at publicity, but it's incredibly difficult to get decent coverage for many reasons, which we haven't got time to go into now. So I would say definitely have more of a go locally to get stuff in local newspapers and on local radio.
Lastly, Alan, in the first couple of months after the result is announced, you know, you said that the first 100 days will be pivotal in this next government. What will journalists be looking for when they hear from organisations like UCU? What kind of examples would make compelling stories and case studies?
I mean, I honestly, unless things change dramatically, I think certainly most national newspapers will be looking for conflict between Labour and all kinds of people. Certainly between Labour and the unions. The first strike under a Labour government, you know, will be a big story. So they'll definitely be looking for conflict. And you know, I don't think it's in any interest of any union to kind of play that game, really. So I think unions like yours will have to just carry on, you know, banging a drum for what's wrong. I mean, just that brief video you showed was incredible. You know, what is actually happening on the ground. Maybe do a very quick kind of survey of your members, not on masses of things, just try and concentrate on one or two issues, because they're the ones that get picked up more. So you know, pay, debt, food banks in universities, all these incredible things. Just concentrate on one or two of those, do a very quick early survey, and just, you know, spin it that this is the scale of what Labour have got to do. Because, you know, you will have to push Labour. There's no question. They're going to have so many demands on them. And the workers one, you know, it's been a little bit controversial already about whether they're railing back or not. So I would look upon it, if I was you, as an opportunity to get things done. But, you know, those are the kind of things I would do, I think.
Thank you. It's worth saying the numbers are increasing as this call is going on. So thank you to everyone joining, and thank you, Alan. I think what I would just say is that the entire premise of the Reclaim HE campaign is actually very much based on what you were just sort of talking about, Alan. You know, every union, including ours, we engage in industrial disputes and ballots if that is the main route that we need to fix a problem. But we hopefully are moving into a new era where the government is going to actually be receptive to campaigning. as opposed to trying to pretend that the problems we're talking about don't exist. And, you know, it means that we as a union can hopefully engage in much more public campaigning, as you say, to really raise awareness, to really shine a light on just how horrific things are for certain groups in particular within higher education, further education, prison education, you know, all of the sectors that we represent. So it is very much what we as a union have been talking about, and how we want to make sure that, you know, we aren't just, you know, running ballots and kind of holding placards, but we are engaging, producing data, producing campaigns that really resonate with people and hopefully lead to change. So thank you very, very much, Alan. I'll let you get back to whatever the conference business is in that you're in Brighton, and I hope it's nice and sunny. Have some fish.
It is. Yeah, okay, thanks for asking anyway. Good luck with everything.
Watch out for the seagulls.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Alan there for sharing his important perspective. But now we are joined by Joe Newman, lecturer in music from Goldsmiths University. Of course, that's a higher education institution that's currently in dispute and is pushing back against plans for widespread cuts and course closures. Joe, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, we've just heard from award-winning journalist Alan Jones about how UCU members can engage with media contacts to build momentum and how important that is going to be. Now, I'd like to ask you about how the team at Goldsmiths University have gone about sounding the alarm and gaining widespread support for your cause.
Thanks so much for having me. And yes, I'll get straight into that. Just before I do, on behalf of the executive committee of Goldsmiths UCU, I'd like to express solidarity with both the Unite UCU branch that are currently in dispute with UCU and the Black Members Standing Committee that are boycotting from their activities as a standing committee at this time. And we urge the senior leadership of this union to engage both groups and to resolve their disputes as soon as possible. With regards to what's going on at Goldsmiths, I can say that one facet of our campaign as we try to resist an estimated 133 redundancies and extensive restructuring has been the work of our press team and a small group of but very skilled and dedicated members. And of course, we do have a media communications and cultural studies department at Goldsmiths. So there's been a small group of our members who've been very active in seeking to writing press releases, engaging their contacts in the media. And there have been a number of high profile articles that have really pushed the extent of the cuts that we're currently fighting in our local dispute. One such one was particularly about the kind of existential threat to the MA in Black British Literature, which is a course that, of course, people may remember was at risk 2 years ago when staff were targeted in the history and English and creative writing courses departments as part of management's recovery program following kind of COVID being used as an excuse to cut back on staff. And at that time, it was under threat. It's been retained. It's under threat again. And in fact, we were only notified that it was not to be cut because we were asked for comment by a press team from, we've got an article about to go out, can you comment? We hadn't even been notified by management at that time, such as their kind of how much they care for kind of really crucial areas of teaching that are kind of being developed. But I would also say that that's one of many facets of the campaign that we're currently, and our dispute and the campaign we're currently fighting, is of course important to engage the press to kind of get word out, as you said, but it's also really important that we do this via our comms team, via social media, both engaging our members, but also supporters in the wider trade union movement, which is going to be crucial to sustaining our dispute, of course, through particularly fundraising to be able to support members through 50% deductions of pay for the marketing assessment boycott that we're currently undertaking, and 100% of pay deductions for the strike action we're currently undertaking over these 2 weeks. And we'd really appreciate a response from the national officers about additional support for that strike action that we're currently undertaking. But in addition, we are, I've just mentioned the industrial action that we're undertaking, and that's really got to be the central plank of any fight back, really. And we're not the only branch that are in dispute. There are many. One article in The Guardian described us as the canary in the coal mine, and that isn't true. There are many branches that are having to fight for their members' jobs, for paying conditions, to protect what they do in their institutions. But we are certainly an institution where management are pursuing really extensive restructuring and a high number of redundancies, basically to shore up their own position. They've already saved 10.1 million in recurrent savings, often through cutting FTC, that's fixed term staff, and associate lecturers, that's casualised staff. They do not need to do this, but they want to break the union, and they want to save so much money that they can justify their own positions and their own salaries at a time when, as we've talked about and Joe's alluded to, the funding model is broken. And due to Brexit and racist policies, relating to visas for students and their spouses and dependents, we are looking at a contraction of the sector. We can continue to do our work, and students will continue to want to study. They shouldn't have to pay for it, as we've said. But this is about a crisis of governance and leadership at institutions where senior management want to continue to justify their salaries by cutting back on permanent staff and attacking our conditions. So I've talked there about industrial action, the importance of that. Yes, press campaign, our comms work, but also I wanted to share that I'm currently joining this meeting from the Council Chamber of Deptford Town Hall. This is one of 2 student occupations currently underway at Goldsmiths, and this is the second occupation of Deptford Town Hall after a historic 137-day occupation by Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action in 2019. Currently, students are occupying this space in solidarity with our demands and in solidarity with our campaign. Students Against the Transformation Programme are occupying and have occupied Deptford Town Hall for over 2 weeks now. But in addition, we have a occupation of the Centre for Contemporary Art on campus, which has demands about Goldsmiths management's complicity with genocide and apartheid and in Gaza, and wanting to push management to divest fully from the Israeli war machine. So that's a form of direct action, which I wanted to finish on, which is something that students are leading the way on, but also we are wanting to go beyond just the kind of realm of industrial action to challenge the power that is held by senior management directly. These are people who are currently not very accountable based on governance structures here and elsewhere at other institutions. And it's really important that they feel that they can be held accountable for their actions and what damage it is doing to both staff and students across the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask in everything that you're doing about some of the challenges that you faced in trying to build momentum and, of course, greater awareness of the negative impact that proposed cuts and closures have upon students, staff, and of course the local community. How would you say that UCU members and branches that are currently in a similar position to yours, that are in disputes, how can they avoid some of these problems and pitfalls that you've come across?
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's 2 things I can say about that. Firstly, there's a strategic question about timing. What was quite significant about the redundancies that management are currently pursuing is they initiated them a little bit later in the year than a previous dispute we had 2 years ago. And I think this is because they wanted to move towards redundancies in the legal processes that they have to undertake in terms of consultation periods as per the trade union labour, the TOLRA 1992. They did that once teaching had finished. And I think this is about wanting to stop unions from taking action that would be very disruptive, but particularly to try and prevent us from engaging students like in the classroom on the threats to their learning conditions, which of course are our teaching conditions as well and our working conditions, and hope that if the student body was largely leaving campus, it would be very difficult to kind of mount a kind of staff, student and local community resistance, exactly as you've said. And obviously they've been proved wrong because, as I've said, we've had 2 student occupations, albeit for different campaigns, but we're very aligned in terms of those political horizons being shared by our branch as well, particularly with the liberation of the Palestinian people. So that's one thing, is that there's a strategic question about trying to engage membership, but also students in the local community at a time when the campus can be quite quiet. So that's definitely one thing I'd share about that. The other is, I guess, not overemphasizing and not kind of putting too much significance on trying to shame these people. And by these people, I'm talking about the senior leadership teams, senior management teams of various institutions. I think in previous years, they may have been a lot more concerned about their public profile. They probably still are. I mean, these are quite, self-involved people. But I think because the sector is contracting, my sense is that people who work in senior management institutions like Goldsmiths and elsewhere They are looking to either wait it out until they can get a better job somewhere else, maybe as a CEO of a charity that's part of the charitable industrial complex, or as I think Frances Corner is trying to do, waiting until she can get a peerage under a Starmer government, and that's a job for life. But I think in previous disputes, it's still important to challenge these people directly. But I think the thing about bad press is sometimes it confirms management's narrative that things are in decline. And that's going to be difficult for lots of our branches to say, well, yes, circumstances are challenging. The funding model is broken, but that doesn't mean you need to cut, because there's no way that if you cut, we might be able to grow again, or even just to stabilize the important things that institutions do to protect jobs, but also to give students the best possible learning and give them agency in their learning in these spaces. So I think it's really, we've got to challenge these people directly. They may not be completely opposed to a bit of bad press, but we've got to make them feel some kind of heat, effectively. They have to feel the weight of the actions of the branch and the local community coming together. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing some really, really helpful insight there. Thank you.
It's been clear to me, and I'm sure to all of you, particularly who work or study in higher education, is that particularly over the last decade, significantly more damage than good has been done. What we do have around the corner, as we've said a few times this evening, is a general election, an opportunity, hopefully, to change that and to reverse some of this decline. It's one of the reasons why I am very, very delighted to introduce friend of UCU, a man who knows a thing or two about government, a Labour MP for Hayes and Harlington, knows a thing or two about a UCU picket line as well, actually, former Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and our friend, John McDonnell. Hi, John.
I'm not sure we
audio is working, John.
Not sure we can hear you, John.
I could add to John's long list of things, renowned fumbler of the mute button.
Can we hear you now, John?
I think you need to go into your audio settings and add your mic. I don't know if you are able to do that, John.
Yes.
Settings, audio, add mic. Hopefully, tech assistance.
No.
Please tell me, John, that you have not been silenced by party forces and that this isn't set up and it is merely you not knowing how to add your mic.
I think this is a technical faux pas, Joe. I hope so anyway, and not darker forces like you suggest.
It's feeling like the icy hand of something, I fear, to me.
It is. Ahead of this election, nothing would surprise me at this point, Joe. Nothing would surprise me.
Come on, John, because these headlines are writing themselves now.
They really are.
Ex-Shadow Chancellor silenced on UCU Live event because he was coming on to say something radical.
We did say we wanted some ways to grab.
Is that working?
For the there he is.
Working?
I didn't know how many more punchlines I had left in me, John.
I don't know.
We almost started a rumor, didn't we?
I was waiting for you to break out into song, to be honest. That was the thing.
Where I'm from in Wakefield, the Labour Club is called the Red Shed, and we do have a rendition of the red flag to the Red Shed. I could do that.
I've been there. I went there at the invitation of a number of stand-up comedians. Anyway, I was fiddling around with settings early, so I must have switched something off. Sorry about that. Okay.
No worries.
Much as I'd like the conspiracy theory of sabotage, this time it hasn't worked, I'm afraid. Okay. I'm looking at myself and I realise I wish I'd have done something about the visual settings. I'm really suntanned because I've been out on the streets in my constituency banging on doors for the last few weeks. And I've missed out on the factor 50, I think, on my nose, but there you are. Okay.
John, you need UVA and UVB.
Everything, absolutely everything. But John, we're delighted that you have made it indoors. Stop canvassing. We're really, really happy that you have decided to join us. And Joe and I, we do have some questions for you, especially now that we can hear you. And John, you will know about the widespread concerns regarding the higher education sector, ranging from a decade of cuts and lack of investment with students and educators being negatively affected by course and department closures, increasing job losses and redundancies, and the widespread use of insecure work contracts. And there's concerns about an irreversible decline of UK universities as they slide down these global league tables, amid fears that the UK is losing its competitive edge. And meanwhile, numerous universities have mounting debts and face closures in the years to come as student recruitment figures are falling. So, in your view, what are the policies that have led us to this crisis point that we're at now? And what policies do you think need to be put in place to ensure a brighter future for UK higher education?
Okay, I was looking through some of the discussions that we've had very early on, some time ago, about the way in which universities and higher education has been moved out of the state sector and to put into the market sector. There was a transformation, and we have to be honest about this. It was a bit of a lobby by a number of vice chancellors that did this as well. It was a lobby which was to take education, higher education, out of the state, being a state institution, and out of the state sector, and turning them into market institutions. And it is part, we talk about a neoliberal agenda, and that's what this is part of. And so we've seen the transformation of higher education. And some of you may remember, I used to use the expression that education for me has always been a gift from one generation to another. But they turned it into a product for sale, and they marketized higher education. And as a result of that, I think they've almost brought it to its knees. I've been on enough UCU picket lines to understand what people have been going through, and also to talk to parents and students as well about the impact of all this. So it is combination of a very strong vice chancellor's lobby, neoliberal imposition across our society, almost hegemony, if you like, introduced by the Tories, but then supported by successive governments, that they then turn higher education into this commodity that is to be sold, and therefore charge the price. And that's where tuition fees came in. The introduced tuition fees resulted in a dependence on those fees to an extent that we said from the very beginning. If you look at some of the UCU briefings on this very early on, we said at that time that this was an unsustainable process, because what would happen is eventually, no matter how low at the original start of tuition fees were, and I voted against the whole introduction of them, you could predict what was happening, and we did predict that actually the level of fees would increase dramatically, and that's what happened. And when they introduced fees at around 3,000, I voted against that. I thought you knew what the Tories and others would do, and they came into power in 2010. They tripled them, and that became a crushing burden on students. So if you turn education into a product and you sell it, you need a marketplace. They turned education into a marketplace, and the students themselves become economic units, and that's what's happened. And then, because tuition fees itself was insufficient, they then depend upon foreign students and charging them huge scale of fees, a whacking scale of fees. And as a result of that, you could almost see the whole system imploding as we predicted. We said at the time on tuition fees that there would be a situation where they wouldn't cover the full cost of education, no matter how high you kept pushing them, because people wouldn't be able to afford them. And we then discovered that what governments were doing was actually assessing the level of non-payment and writing billions off. So the whole system was set up, and it was inevitable it would be implode, and that's what's happening at the moment. And in addition, you ramp up foreign fees to foreign students high enough, and there's a deterrent effect as well on that. And I've been touring around the country speaking to different groups, and you mentioned the crisis in the funding of education. As we know, some of these institutions are on the edge of almost bankruptcy as a result of the system itself. And I think what we've got to try and do is reopen the whole debate about what education is all about. UCU have been doing this in their briefings, which have been really helpful. Of course, education is about the improvement of people's lives, the enjoyment of their lives, the development of an understanding of the world, an understanding of specific aspects of life, and an understanding of areas of life that people can develop their interests to their self-fulfillment. That's the first thing. But the second thing as well, and it's bizarre how successive governments haven't really understood this properly, that actually investing in higher education in particular, you're producing the expertise upon which a thriving economy depends. So if you start undermining the funding of higher education in particular, what happens is, yes, you undermine the quality of people's lives, and that means the quality of society overall. But in addition to that, you're undermining one of the very fundamental foundation stones of a thriving economy. Joe mentioned I was Shadow Chancellor, and the one thing I agreed with Tony Blair about was when he came to power in 1997, it was education, 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 investment in education. And when I was Shadow Chancellor, I made it a priority that we would pour resources into education, particularly higher education, because that would be the basis upon which we would develop the talent, the skills, the research that we needed to develop a modern economy. And I still, for the life of me, can't understand why people don't appreciate that enough across the political parties. Blair went down the wrong path of tuition fees, and it was disastrous. But at least there was an understanding that you had to invest in education. At the moment, I don't think there's a thorough enough understanding of that. I find education is both emancipatory in terms of you can develop your talents, you can ensure that you have that freedom to enjoy your lives and enjoy the whole understanding of the world. But alongside that, it is such an investment in developing assets with regard to individuals and groups of individuals working together to lay the basis of a successful economy. That's why I think there's an argument in this coming period to be won. I've listened to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, current Shadow Chancellor, and today she was interviewed, and again, her argument is that the way that we can afford public services in the future is that we grow the economy. And I completely agree that growing the economy is a way in which you can raise the resources that you can then plough back into public services. But to grow the economy, the argument that I've been putting forward for so long is that you have to invest before that growth comes about. You have to invest to secure that growth. And one of the key areas of investment, a lot of people talk about capital investment, and I fully agree that's part of it. It's a crucial part of growing an economy. You invest in capital. But you have to invest in individuals as well. And the way you invest in individuals is to ensure that they have the skills and the knowledge to develop the ideas upon which the economy will be based. And that means education. It means further and higher education. That's possibly the most valuable investment that you can make if you want to grow the economy. But you have to put the money in first before you get the benefits of it. Growing the economy by 1% reaps in terms of taxation, about £14 billion. Growing the economy by 1% is a hell of a struggle, but you can do it. But you have to invest capital and skills, and that's what higher education is all about. So I think that's the way forward, and that's the way we win the argument. And I actually do think any government, and it's almost certain now by the looks of the polls, it's going to be a Labour government. If that Labour government wants to succeed, it has to invest in higher education. And I have to say that means bringing the UCU round the table to discuss the implementation of the policies that we need to develop an economy that's based upon high skills and research and a workforce that can use its education to such public benefit overall. So that's where I'm coming from at the moment. I look back on the last 14 years in particular, but before then also at the introduction of tuition fees. as though the whole country has gone down a real cul-de-sac now. We've got to try and entice it out of that and have a real fundamental discussion about what education is all about and what's needed.
Thank you so much for that. A lot there. I think I just want to pick up on something you were sort of saying towards the end, which is, you know, making parallels between now and 1997, the importance of education, but also the importance of investing, because obviously part of the issue that we've had over the last 14 years is, as you said, the extent to which students have been asked to pay more, funding has been slashed. You know, Two Brains Willits and his entire plan for this entire model that doesn't even function on its own merits anymore has been a disaster. But, and I think comparing to 97 is really important. So, disclosure alert, I was at school in 1997. I went to college in 2000, and I was at my local college, Wakefield College, between 2000 and 2002. People will remember one of the most important things, in my opinion, that Labour introduced and invested in at that time was the educational maintenance allowance. Mm-hmm. Because of the type of local authority Wakefield was, we were a pilot area for that. And I had friends, you know, if we're talking about the attacks on working class people and the anti-working class agenda that we've seen underpin education policy for the past decade from the Tories, it has been about preventing working class kids going to college, let alone, you know, going to universities. And that's why we've seen attacks on continuing education. So, you know, I would love to see something as bold as that from the Treasury and from the Labour Party more broadly following an election. We, for what it's worth, for UCU members watching, have enjoyed good communication with the shadow education team and with Labour more broadly, despite not being affiliated union. We have plans to continue that engagement because I think, again, as you said, John, the challenge isn't really for us to kind of be briefing people who already know how bad this is. And part of this Reclaim HE campaign is about taking these messages out and making a campaign for higher education a public campaign, something that everybody understands and buys into, which is my next question to you. I imagine you paid much more attention to the Labour Party manifesto, but looking at the main parties' manifestos, I'm wondering where you see similarities with UCU demands for the next government, which parties you think have the better grasp. And I know Afia has another question after mine, but it's not your suntan which is capturing my attention, John. It is your musical instrument. And I wondered if you'd learned to play it yet, because I remember last time you were still taking lessons.
Yeah, I have a weekly lesson on my trombone. It's more of a therapy session than a training session. But yes, I love it. And the neighbours have stopped petitioning the council about the noise, which is really helpful. So that's good. If you look across the political spectrum, let's just deal with Labour. In their manifesto, there is a clear understanding in a couple of paragraphs. In a manifesto, you know as well as I do that if you can just get a couple of sentences on a subject, that builds you the base. That's the entry point for discussion with the political party that's going into government. So within the Labour manifesto, there is 2 points of access for us. One is, as I say, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer himself saying, this is all about growth, 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 okay? You cannot get growth in the economy, full stop, unless you invest in education. And I have to say, in particular, in further and higher education, if you want fast growth. That's the first thing. So that's one point of entry. The second point of entry in the Labour manifesto is there is an acknowledgement that there is a crisis in higher education in particular. They acknowledge that. So again, you've had these discussions with the front bench. They understand that there's a crisis there. So therefore, they understand that at some point during their period of office, they've got to deal with that. Our argument has got to be deal with it early, because if you deal with it early, you will have built up a resource that will feed into your growth strategy. I think that they're very careful about what they've said about expenditure and fiscal rules, etc. My view is after the election, they'll enter into implementing their first steps, their half a dozen policies which they've called first steps. But then after that, they'll have to look more broadly at where they go from here and what their priorities are. I think what we've got to do from UCU is shape that second wave of policies, which is around investment in education to grow the economy and to do it as quickly as possible. That's the first thing. I've looked at, you'd expect me to say this, but I'm trying to be as objective as I possibly can. I just despair of the Tories. I think they're on the edge of being wiped out, not just because of reform, but because on ideas they're absolutely bankrupt. Reform are saying almost the same things. And then what are they doing? First of all, they're willing to close down courses. That's the first thing. Even not on educational merit or anything like that. They seem to say solely on the basis of how much people going through those courses will eventually earn. Well, actually, many of those people who at the moment may not be earning an awful lot are the people we depend upon in a whole range of, particularly in sciences and elsewhere, in our health service, elsewhere, in the elements of research and development that take place. So it's a ludicrous criteria to use. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that both Reform and the Tories now are talking about slashing the visa system so that you're preventing people coming in here when we desperately need not just the income from those students coming here, but also we need their talent as well to feed into our education system. And if you look at our history in the past, the relationship between foreign students coming here, working alongside British students and all the rest, you look at the research that went on where elements of specialisms feed each other. To undermine the visa system in that way completely undermines not just education, but also it undermines the feed into the economy itself. The issue we need to be honest about is that there doesn't, and this is in the UCU manifesto, and I think it's absolutely straightforward. At some stage, a Labour government is going to have to reappraise its investment strategy and therefore where further resources will come from. Achieving, as I say, just 1% growth is tough and takes time, brings you in about 14 billion. You've got to bring in resources earlier than that. And I think some of the ideas that we put forward in the past, I think Labour will have to move onto that ground. Equalising capital gains tax with income tax, that sort of thing. Looking at, as the UC have argued, the benefits of further and higher education are reaped by employers. Why can't the employers pay a little bit more to fund education in that way? And in that way, you can get that sort of development of a relationship as well between employers paying a little bit more corporation tax and the development of the academic standards that we're developing that they will then depend upon for the future of their own economic development as individual corporations and companies, etc. So I think that's where we need to be. I'm really disappointed, as you can guess, that none of them really, the parties that potentially going to be in government, that is, none of them are talking about scrapping tuition fees. I'm really disappointed at that. But again, I think they're going to have to come back to it at some stage because the tuition fee system is imploding. You know, large numbers of graduates will never be able to pay those tuition fees off. Governments will write off lots of that debt in due course. And what we've got to do is get the next Labour government to admit that and understand it, and then look to how we, I think, work towards abolishing tuition fees in the long term, at least reducing them in the first instance. And again, I think there's some room to manoeuvre there with the incoming Labour government.
I think that final point is so crucial. And, you know, everyone on this call, watching this on replay, who works in education fundamentally understands the introduction and the just explosion of student fees has just led to so many more extra problems. It justifies all of the, you know, ways of measuring staff that work in education that are problematic because, you know, you need metrics to feed marketisation. As you say, it hasn't solved a funding crisis. It, you know, saddles students with lots of private debt before they've even kind of started out in life. Many won't pay it back anyway. And it really, I think, solving the funding issue and the fees issue would be key to unlocking a lot of the other issues to do with marketisation and issues that we want to resolve. I know Afia had another question for you, but your answer has been so comprehensive, John, that you have actually covered what we were going to ask you. So just a final word from me before I hand over to Afia to say goodnight as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. Thank you, John. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Alan. We have just a few weeks now until the election. A lot of the unions campaigning at the minute is on how we lift the profile of our prison educators, continuing education, our college members and our university members. So please, if you're a member watching this, have a look on the website, whether you're in HE or FE, check out the Reclaim HE things in particular and the lobbying guidance that is on there. And I do want to just echo and share the kind of message of hope that John just has. I don't want to pretend that there's things in any of these manifestos, and particularly not Labour's, that we should be jumping for joy on. But what we are hearing as a union, and I think what we are very well placed to do, is almost see what we're going to get immediately as an instalment. And it's down to us to campaign and to lobby and to fight and to widen the pool of interest to make sure that we get more and more and more. So it is good night from me, and thank you for joining us. And Afia, I'm sure you want to say good night as well.
Yes, I mean, just a massive thank you to you, Joe, and also to our guests, John, Joe, and Alan. Like you said, it brings us to the end of this event. Thank you to you guys for tuning in as well. And please look for more updates from UCU over the coming weeks. So good night, and thank you so much to everybody for joining.